In the previous tutorial, we show you if the problem you're trying to solve is you're trying to expecting an integer between 1 and 10, some lower bound and some upper bound. The correct operator to use would be logical conjunction. Whereas if you try to use logical disjunction instead, it's going to produce a wrong result. And that is how we trace the two versions of program for you in the previous video. And please make sure you understand that before you go on with the current video. In the current video, we're going to show you a similar problem but working on another direction to say now we don't expect the integer to be between 1 and 10. We expect it to be the opposite. So how can we do it? Okay, so now we're going to do it exactly similar, but let's now create a Java class and then I'll show you how we can do it. Okay, so now what let's create a new class first. So right click on the project and say new and then class. Okay, you can say logical operation and app 3a. Okay, again, we're going to show you two versions, one correct version and version B will be the wrong version, and then we'll trace the code for both versions together and see how they differ. Okay, you should understand not only why version A works, but also equally importantly, understand why version B doesn't work. Okay, let's click on main method here and say finish. Okay, so now the problem that we are trying to solve is now we expect the integer entered by the user not to be in a particular range. For example, let's say 1 and 10. Okay, just use that since we used that for the previous video. Let's just use that to solve a different problem. So both problems are possible depending on what you need. Okay, sometimes you expect the user's input to be within a particular range, and sometimes you don't expect to be in particular range depending on what you need. Okay, nothing's impossible. So you want to learn both cases. Okay, so now let me illustrate to you what the problems that we're trying to solve, and then we'll do it together. Okay, so now what I want to do right now is let's see the number line over here. Okay, and then the critical bounds that we talk about is the lower bound is 1 over here, and the upper bound over here is 10. Okay, between 1 and 10. Okay, so now in the previous case, in the previous video, we say that the integer is expected to be between 1 and 10. Now let's do the other problem. Let's say we don't expect the numbers to be between 1 and 10. That means it's either below 1 or it's above 10. Okay, so now I better try to fix this a little bit over here. Okay, what I would do is I will do a empty circle. Oh, sorry. What I will do is I'll do an empty circle over here, which means this is exclusive, right? So I'll do empty circle over here. So what I'm trying to see over here is, so if I'm within this range over here, that is not as expected, so I should return false. Otherwise, if it is either below 1 over here, or it is above 10, then I'll be okay. Oh, let me just draw that a little bit more precisely. What I meant was, if it is in between 1 and 10, it will be considered as not as expected. Okay, so this is not expected. In that case, we should return false. That's kind of the conceptual idea for this particular problem. We don't expect the number to be between 1 and 10. However, if it is either below the lower bound, this would be expected, in which case we'll return true. Or it's above the upper bound, in that case we'll also say it's expected, and then we return true. Then I would say it's either this or that. So now hopefully it will be quite straightforward to you that we should use disjunction. Okay, so let's try to do that quickly on the iPad, and then we'll translate it into Java, the correct version, and then we'll do the wrong version. So what I would do is we can say it's either that let's say the input is simply just I by the user. We can say either I is less than 1 or I is greater than 10, basically. Okay, we're using logical disjunction over here, right? So this is something we want to do. Okay, so this use of logical disjunction will make sure if you enter a number, for example, if you say -2, it will be within this range. It's not within 1 and 10, so that will give us true. Okay. If you use, for example, let's say 5 over here, that's sorry, not 5. What I meant to say was, let's say if I give you, let's say 15, that's also above the upper bound, so that should also give me true. And if anything that's within this range over here, so that would be, let's say for example 5, that would be false. Okay. So this is the reason that this is I'm showing you this because this is a second category of problem. You simply don't expect the input integer to be within this particular range. And in the previous video, we're just showing another category of problem. So you should understand both categories, right? Depending on what you need. Okay. Okay, so now we'll go back there to Java, Eclipse, and then let's program that. So again, we're gonna use scanner. Okay, scanner, and then input is assigned to new scanner system.in, and then at the end we say input.close. Okay, so now we're going to do something over here. So now again system.out.println. Okay, now enter an integer that is not between 1 and 10, right? Okay, you want to enter an integer that's not between 1 and 10. So this is like the opposite problem that we're trying to, as opposed to what we solved in the previous video. Okay, so now we say integer I is assigned to input.nextInt. Okay, and then we're going to do a Boolean variable to store the result. We're going to say Boolean over here. Okay, so now it's not between 1 and 10. Okay, again, it's a compound word. Okay, all lower cases for the first word, and then capitalized for all the words onwards. Okay, what I will do is I'll do exactly what we set on the iPad over here. Is either when I is strictly less than the lower bound, or I is strictly larger than the upper bound. Okay, that's the correct version. And then we'll trace the correct version first, and then we'll show you the wrong version, which is, and also we'll trace why it doesn't work. You should understand both. And what we'll do is we'll say system.out.println. Over here we'll say, let me cheat a little bit. I can simply go back to version 2a. I will just copy this one here and modify that a little bit. Okay, just save some typing. And then I'll copy this line over here. The number you enter, which is I, in that case, we don't expect it to be between 1 and 10. And should that be true or false? Okay, it's not between 1 and 10. Let me copy that. Oops, sorry, let me do it again. So now Control C and then Control V. Okay, it's not between 1 and 10. Okay, so now let's try it out. Okay, and now let's try the various input. Right, for example, we can try -2, in which case we should get true. We can try 15, in which case we should get true. We can try 5, in which case we should get false, right? So now let's launch this program here over here. So it should be 3A, okay? Run as Java application over here, and then let's try the various results. The first one I would like to try, let's try -2. Okay, -2 is not between 1 and 10. That should be true. Okay, that is expected. And now re-execute the program, and now let's also try 15, which is strictly above the upper bound. And now if I try 15 over here, 15 is not between 1 and 10. That's also true as expected. And now let's execute one more time. And now if we try, let's say 5 over here, and for 5, and then we should expect to see false, because 5 is not between 1 and 10. That's not right, because 5 is indeed between 1 and 10. So that's not the case that 5 is not in between. So it should be false. Okay, so hopefully you can see in this version here, it simply just work. But I'm going to trace the program, and then I'm going to modify a little bit to create a second version that is wrong, and then trace it for you. Okay, it's really important for you to understand logical rationale behind why a program works and also why a program doesn't work. Okay, it's both important. So now what I will do is I'm gonna again do a snapshot. So control, okay, let me see. I'm take a snapshot over here only for this fragment of code, and then we'll trace it together on my iPad. Okay, it's copied, and then I'll go back to iPad over here. Okay, let me go to a fresh page for you, and then first of all, we're gonna paste it. Okay, it's gonna transfer to my iPad. Just wait a bit. Okay, good. And then I'm going to paste it. Okay, this is the version over here. Okay, that's the correct version. Let me just notice that. So this is the correct version that we're going to focus on for now. Okay, for the correct version, let's think about two test cases, right? Let's think about one test case where we should get true, another case where we should get false. For the true case, why don't we just get a negative value, -2? And the way to trace 15 would be just similar. I can leave that to you as an exercise, right? We're going to try -2 and also 5, okay? So let's say test 1. Test 1. We're going to try -2. And for test 2, we're going to try 5, okay? And then let me just box it so you can see that in isolation. So these are the two test cases. For test 1, we're expecting true because -2 is not in between 1 and 10. And for test 2, we're expecting false because 5 is indeed between 1 and 10. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. So now let's try individually. Okay, let's try the first one. So now for number 1, so let's try this. Okay, when we say enter integer that is not between 1 and 10, and then when we prompt the user enters some integer, let's say for the first one, we're gonna let them enter -2. So that means they're going to enter -2 over here, okay? So this is going to be -2, okay? And then that means -2 will be stored inside I. So that means we got -2 over here, and we got -2 over here, right? -2 less than 1, we know that is true, okay? -2 larger than 10, we know that is false. Agree? Okay? So now, how do we calculate true or false? If you recall the truth table, as long as one of the operands for disjunction is true, overall is going to be true. That means this particular calculation over here, true or false, is going to be true. Okay? So that's the result. Okay? So that is why when we say the number you entered, which is -2, is not between 1 and 10. In this case, we're going to print out the value for this variable over here. By the way, of course, this stores the value for calculation over here. So this is true. And so this will be true. Okay, so this is why when we see it from the previous run, when you enter -2, it's going to be true. Because indeed, -2 is not between this interval, because we're not expecting that to be. Okay, so now let's see a run for the correct version where it's going to return false as expected. Okay, so let me just paste the same fragment of code over here, and then we're going to have a different run. Okay, so now for the second run, we're going to do the test value 5. Okay, and then, okay, we try over here, enter a value between 1 and 10. Okay, we'll prompt the user, and let's say for this test 2, user enters 5 over here, right? That's what they do, enter 5. And then that means I will be storing 5 this time for the second test. And then, so that means I over here will be 5, and I over here will be 5. And let's try, okay? 5 less than 1 is false. 5 larger than 10 will be false. So we are facing this calculation false or false. So remember, this is the only scenario to make disjunction false, which means none of the operands is true. Okay? So this will give us false. So that means over here, we know that the overall evaluation over here is going to be false. That means we're going to store false into this particular Boolean variable over here. That will be false. Okay? So now, the number you enter when we try to execute this line, the number you entered, I, in this case, will be 5. It's not between 1 and 10. And now in this case, the value that we store in this particular variable is simply just false. Okay, this is as expected. And also, this true over here in the previous case is also as expected. Okay, so now, okay, hopefully you have followed this tracing over here. We did something very similar in the previous video, but notice that we are solving different problems over here. Okay, don't get confused. Either you can solve the problem where you're expecting the number to be in a particular range, which is for the previous video, or you're solving another kind of problem where you're not expecting the number to be in this particular range, in which case you use logical disjunction to be the correct operator. Okay, just make sure you really distinguish between the two kinds of problem well. So now let's create a wrong version. Okay, so now because we know that for this particular problem, logical disjunction would be the correct choice. That means logical conjunction should be the wrong choice. What if we choose it? What if we chose it? What's going to happen? So let's see exactly what's going to happen here. So now if you right click on this class over here and say copy, and then right click again and you say paste. Okay, so now we're going to have 3b and say okay. Okay, so now we got 3b over here. Okay, so now we're going to say wrong choice of operator. Okay, so now rather than disjunction over here, I'm going to say conjunction. Okay, nothing else changed. So this is the only thing we made. Let me just close 3a. So only 3b is open now. So the only thing we changed from version 3a to version 3b is we changed from logical disjunction to logical conjunction. And I claim that this is false. This is wrong. But let's see exactly why it is wrong. Now, first of all, I'm going to show you why in the console output is not going to produce the right result. So we know that there's a logical error. And then we go back to iPad and show you the tracing. Okay. Hopefully everything just makes sense to you so far. Okay, let's now go to our package explorer, right click on 3b over there and say run as Java application. Okay, so now let me just do the same two tests. Okay, for the first test -2, we're expecting true, right? So now if we go for -2 over here, we're expecting true. However, it says that the number you enter -2 is not between 1 and 10. It tells you false. Okay, that's not very good. All right. So we know that we already got some logical error indicated from this. Let's do another one. The second case will be 5. In that case, let's rerun the program. Okay, and now if we say 5 over here, and then it will say the number you enter 5 is not between 1 and 10, it will be false. Okay, so that means the first test produced the wrong result, whereas the second test seems to be producing the correct result. Okay, but still, as long as there's a possibility you produce the wrong result, your program is not correct. As easy as that. But at the end of the video, I'm going to make a remark to tell you how wrong this use of conjunction over here it is. Okay, let's see how we can trace the program. Right? Let's do exactly the same practice over here. It's a very crucial skill for yourself to be able to trace the program by yourself, like how I illustrated to you. But hopefully you can learn it over time. Okay, let me take a snapshot for this incorrect version of the program, and then we'll move on to iPad. Okay, you know what? Let me just make it a little bit bigger for me. Okay, that's good. Okay, let me take the snapshot over here, starting from this until over here, and then I will make a snapshot. Okay, let me go back to iPad over here, and then I'm gonna show you the incorrect version. Okay, so now let me try to. I don't think it has been properly copied to the clipboard. Let me do it once more. Okay. Okay, let me do the snapshot again. Okay, let me capture this area over here, and then come back here, and then I will say let me try to see. So this is not the correct version actually. Okay, let me just try to do once more. I'm not sure why it is not capturing, but let's try it once more. Okay, so now we'll say try to copy that snapshot over here and copy. Okay, let's go back to iPad over here, And then, okay, it's now reacting. Okay. Again, sorry about the time being wasted, but hopefully it's worth the wait. Okay, so now let's go back here. Okay, that's a wrong version. Okay, let me just write it down. This is the wrong version. Wrong version because we chose the wrong logical operator over here, right? You can see it's conjunction rather than disjunction. Okay, just pay attention to that. Okay, so now we're gonna see how we can trace the same two tests over here and see why they produce the wrong result. Okay, so now for the first one, for test 1, we're gonna do -2. Okay, so now we prompt the user for integer, and then in this case, the input on next in from the keyboard, the user is going to enter -2. So that means -2 will be stored into I. And then we know that I will be -2 over here, I will be -2 over here, right? So now -2 less than 1 should give us the same result as before, so that should just be true. And -2 larger than 10 should also give us the right result as before, okay? False. Okay, so now that means we're evaluating true and false as opposed to true or false, right? And now for the case of conjunction, as long as one of the operand is false, it's going to be false overall. Okay, so now we know that this is going to be false. And now that means this particular part of evaluation is going to be false. That means false is going to be stored into this particular variable over here. That'll be false, right? And now let's try to print it out. The number you entered, which is -2, is not between 1 and 10. In that case, whatever value it is stored, in this case, is false. Okay, you can see that this is inconsistent with the result that is produced by the correct version. So we know that there is a logical error over here. Okay, this is not right. Okay, let's just do the same similar tracing for the other case, and then I'll make a remark for you. Okay, so now you have to understand why it's producing an inconsistent result. Okay, so you will be able to trace the program by yourself. So now let me just also paste this wrong version over here, and then I'm gonna put it here. Okay, the same block of code, but we're gonna actually try to run it with a different test input. Can I make it bigger for you? Okay, that's as big as I could get. Okay, good. So now let's try the second input over here, which is 5. All right. So now let's go over here. Now we say enter an integer that is not between 1 and 10. So now let's say the user enter 5 over here. Okay, this is 5, and then we have 5 over here being stored, right? And then we have 5 over here, and we got 5 over here, and the same as before. So now 5 less than 1, as we know previously, it should be false. Excuse me. And then it would be just 5. And then 5 larger than 10, as we calculated previously, is also false, right? False and false. So this is false, and this is also false. So the individual relational operations should really produce the same result as before. So now we are facing false and false versus false or false in the correct version. Well, luckily, coincidentally, we just produced false because at least one of them is actually false for conjunction, so it will be false. So that means overall, we're going to store false into this particular variable over here, which is false, right? So we'll say when we execute the last line, the number you enter over here, which is I, and it is 5. It's not between 1 and 10. In this case, well, whatever we store in this variable over here is false. Okay, and coincidentally, this is okay. However, as long as you got one possibility where the result is simply not as expected as in the correct version, then your program is simply not correct. Okay. So now let's make a remark very quickly, and then I'll summarize between this video and the previous video about the two problems, and then we are done for this video here. So now what I want to do is let's go back to over here. Okay. So now you can see that this particular illustration over here corresponds to the correct use of the disjunction over here, right? Let's see how the diagram would look like if we try to change from disjunction to conjunction. Okay, that's something I want to illustrate. Okay, let's say we have a number line over here. Okay, let me just make it better. So we have a number line over here, and then we have 1 here, and then we have 10 here. Okay, over here. Okay, it simply just circle. Okay, let me make it a little bit better. Okay, we got 1 and 10. Okay, 1 here, and we got 10 here. Okay, 1 and 10. And now, when we say I less than 1 and incorrectly put conjunction instead, and I larger than 10, what's going to happen over here, right? So basically, you're saying the following. You're trying to say, I want some number which would be in the orange part, which is I less than 1. And also, it should be at the same time also sits in this orange region as well, I larger than 10. Is it possible to find a number in the line somewhere such that it can be here and here at the same time? No, it's not possible. If the number happens to be here, it cannot be here. If a number happens to be here, it cannot be here, basically, right? So now, that's simply this conjunction here can be simplified into basically false, which is very symmetric to when we talk about the previous disjunction over here. Let me just show you the previous disjunction. Let me just see where. I want to show that to you. Okay, you can see that. Okay, let me show you. In the previous video, we say that this particular disjunction can be simplified to false. Okay, because it's just going to cover every possibility over here. Versus in the current video, we say that if you're using conjunction over here, it can be simplified to false. Okay, so what does that mean? That means when we are in version 3B, this condition over here, this condition is equivalent to false, which means there'll be no user input integer that can ever satisfy this property over here, which means this expression here doesn't matter what I is, it will always be evaluated to false, which means you always print just false, even in the case where you're expecting to print true. Okay, so that's why this is the wrong version. Okay, so now let me summarize the two versions for you. Okay, very quickly, and then we are done. But it's really important for you to really understand the two kinds of problems that we're trying to solve. Over here. So now we got problem number 1. Okay, expect input within an interval. Okay, that's problem number 1 that we're trying to solve. What about problem number 2? Another problem that we're trying to solve is, so we expect the input rather than within, outside an interval. Okay, in that case, that's let me do a little bit better. Okay, that's kind of the problem we're trying to solve. Problem number 1 and problem number 2. And the example we did was like this. Okay, and then let's see this. So we got correct version, we got wrong version. In the case of correct version, for problem number 1, so it would be something like this. You can say, let's say user input is simply just I in both cases. So 1 less than or equal to I, and I less than or equal to 10. So this is the correct version for problem number 1. Okay, and now, of course, you can also try to use the test input that we talked about, but I'll leave that to you. Okay. Now, what about the correct version for problem number 2? It would be either I is strictly below the lower bound, or I is strictly above the upper bound. Okay. You can see in one case you use conjunction, in the other case you use disjunction, depending on which problem you're trying to solve. All right. Let's look at the incorrect version. Okay. The incorrect version is if you use the wrong logical operator. For the first problem there, if you simply say 1 less than or equal to I, and also I, let me just make it more explicit to you, just to emphasizing the logical operator. Let's say this, 1 less than or equal to I, and also I less than or equal to 10. But somehow you mistakenly use disjunction, okay? Disjunction over here. And what we said previously is this can be just reduced to true, which means if you try to use this one here, it's always going to tell you true. Okay? So now because it's simply just going to be something like this, right? If you got 1 and 10 over here, you're saying that I is either larger than equal to 1 or is smaller than or equal to 10, right? It's just going to cover the entire number line. Okay, that's what we said. Now let's try another one here. So now let's say you try this. For this second problem here, what will be the wrong version? If you say I is strictly below the lower bound, I is strictly above the upper bound, but you use, let's say, conjunction instead. And what we said before is this will simply be reduced to false, which means there will be no number that can satisfy this constraint over here. Well, conceptually, you can think about if, again, number line over here, you're saying I'm trying to find a number that's either strictly below the lower bound or strictly above the upper bound. There's simply no number that can be both here and here at simultaneously. It's simply not possible. So that means this particular range constraint is always going to return false, whereas this will always return true. So there'll be no distinction between different test cases, right? So now you have to understand for this particular problem, you should use conjunction, and you should also understand why using disjunction will be inappropriate. And for this particular problem over here, you should understand why you should use disjunction, whereas using conjunction will also be appropriate, which you should also understand why. Okay, so make sure before you move on to the next video, which will start talking about using if statements, really make sure you understand these kind of basic rules for the logic, and also these simple problems that I just demonstrated to you.